As the wheels of his plane touched down, Wesley Carter had no idea his world had already been sold. In 3 weeks, his mother erased his home, his savings, his trust, all for a failing farm and a brother drowning in debt. Now, a stranger sleeps in his bed and family means betrayal.
I had been counting the days to that vacation the way people in prison count chalk marks on a wall. After months of red-eye flights, turbulence reports, crew shortages, and smiling at passengers who believed screaming at a pilot could somehow fix weather, I finally shut the door on my last flight, threw my uniform into the trunk, and drove straight home with a grin I hadn't felt since my divorce was finalized. 3 weeks in Thailand. No alarms, no schedules, no cockpit checklists, just beaches, cheap beer, and the radical concept of sleeping past sunrise. Before leaving, I did the usual responsible adult routine. I unplugged everything that didn't absolutely need power, checked the locks twice, and hid the spare key behind the flower pot my mother had given me when I bought the house. The house was my pride. A modest one-story place at the edge of a quiet Kentucky town. Nothing fancy, but it was mine. I had poured $260,000 into it over the years, every spare dollar from overtime flights, every bonus, every tax refund. The mortgage was almost gone. For the first time in my adult life, I was tasting what financial breathing room felt like. My mother, Jinnah, came by the morning I left to water the plants and make sure the fridge was empty, so nothing died a smelly death while I was gone. She fussed over me the way she always did, straightening a picture frame that had been crooked for 4 years and pretending she just noticed it now. I handed her the keys with the usual joke about not turning the place into a secret bingo hall. She laughed, promised to behave, and reminded me for the 5th time to wear sunscreen. What I did not think about was the document sitting in some forgotten drawer at her house. A general power of attorney I had signed 5 years earlier while recovering from surgery, back when I thought paperwork was something that only mattered to lawyers and people with too much free time. I barely remembered signing it. At the time, it felt like one of those grown-up formalities you do, and then never have to think about again. I flew out that afternoon, and, true to my word, I disconnected from the world. No roaming plan, no checking email, no quick peeks at social media. I wanted my brain as empty as the minibar in my hotel room. For the first week, I did nothing but eat street food that probably violated several health codes and let strangers convince me that every local drink was very traditional. I didn't know that while I was learning how to pronounce the name of my 4th beach, my Uncle Randall was staring at foreclosure notices like they were death certificates. Randall had always been the family cautionary tale. Horse breeding business, he called it. Romantic, he said. Noble. What he really meant was expensive barns, even more expensive animals, and a breathtaking talent for turning optimism into debt. By the time I was lying in a hammock listening to waves, he was 30 days away from losing the farm that had been in the Hope family for 3 generations. He went to my mother the only way he knew how, not with a plan, but with panic, telling her the bank would take everything if he didn't come up with over $300,000 immediately. My sister Haley found out about it before I did, because unlike me, she kept her phone on and answered when Mom called, crying. Haley later told me she tried to argue, told Mom that this wasn't her problem to fix, that she couldn't just throw money at Randall's disasters. But Mom, in her own quiet way, was already somewhere else, mentally flipping through a list of people she could save and people she couldn't. And somewhere in that internal math, my name ended up in the wrong column. I was on a ferry between islands when my house was listed for sale. I was floating in turquoise water when a realtor was telling a cash buyer that the owner's son was away on business and wanted the deal done fast. I was blissfully offline when my mother signed my name under hers and transferred my entire future into someone else's hands. I came home 3 weeks later with sand still in my shoes and jet lag pounding behind my eyes, completely unaware that I no longer owned the place I was driving back to. The drive from the airport felt oddly calm. I remember thinking that it was nice to be back on American roads, where lanes meant something and cars didn't pass you on the shoulder just to wave like maniacs. I had a mild headache, a stale airline muffin in my stomach, and a growing craving for a long nap in my own bed. I was already planning it out. Shower, blackout curtains, collapse. Maybe later I'd call Haley. Maybe Mom if I felt generous. But first, silence, darkness, home. When the cab turned onto my street, I sat up a little straighter. Something was off. The lawn looked neater than I remembered. The hedges were trimmed, and there was a silver SUV parked right in the middle of my driveway. I didn't recognize it. That wasn't unusual. Delivery drivers sometimes pulled in too far. But the second thing I noticed really stopped me. The curtains, bright blue, patterned. Definitely not mine. I got out, rolling my suitcase over the familiar walkway, trying to convince myself I had just forgotten something. Maybe I'd asked a neighbor to house sit? No, I never trusted people with that. Maybe Mom brought in a cleaner while I was gone. But who the hell changes curtains? I rang the bell. A man in his 40s opened the door like he'd been expecting a delivery. Khakis, polo shirt, the easy confidence of someone standing in his home. "Can I help you?" "Yeah," I said, trying to keep my tone casual. "I'm Wesley Carter. This is my house." The man raised an eyebrow. No, it's not. My name's Kevin Drake. I bought this house about 3 weeks ago. You must be mistaken." For a split second, I wondered if I had hallucinated the address. But there it was, on the mailbox, the same numbers I'd stared at for 4 years. My brain started slowing down, as if it needed to double-check every second of the past month. Kevin noticed my confusion. "Look, I'm not trying to be difficult. I can show you the paperwork." He disappeared inside and returned with a folder. I opened it with hands that felt too cold for Kentucky in August. Purchase agreement, transfer of deed, everything official, clean. Then I saw it. Seller, Jenna Carter, acting as legal agent for Wesley Carter under power of attorney. I nearly dropped the damn thing. Kevin, to his credit, looked uncomfortable. I'm really sorry. If this is some sort of misunderstanding, maybe you should talk to her." She was very clear that the sale was urgent. I couldn't even respond. I just handed the folder back, nodded mechanically, and walked down the driveway, pulling my suitcase behind me like a stranger. I stood by the curb, staring at the house that I had fixed up with my own hands, the one where I patched the roof myself, where I painted the walls after the divorce just to feel like something in my life was new. And now there were children's toys on the front porch. A wind chime I hadn't hung. Someone else's life had moved into mine like I'd been evicted from reality. I booked a room at the nearest motel I could afford without feeling like a cliché. The clerk didn't even look up when I checked in, just slid me a key and mumbled something about breakfast ending at 9. Inside the room, I sat on the edge of the bed for a long time, just holding my phone. The number I finally dialed wasn't my lawyer's. It was my mother's. She answered on the second ring, cheerful. "Wesley! Oh, sweetheart, how was the trip? Did you—" "Mom," I interrupted. "Did you sell my house?" There was a silence on the line that made the walls feel smaller. I know you're upset," she said finally, her voice already cracking. "But please let me explain. You sold my house." I had to, she said, and just like that, the dam broke. Randall was going to lose the farm. The bank gave him a deadline. I didn't know what else to do. You were gone. I couldn't reach you. I thought, "You didn't try," I said flatly. "You didn't email. You didn't call the airline. You didn't ask Haley. You just took it." "It's not theft, Wesley," she insisted. "I had the power of attorney. It was legal." I could hear my own breathing, louder than her voice. "Legal doesn't mean right. You took $260,000 of my life, without asking." "You're young," she said, her voice desperate. "You'll recover. You have time. But Randall, this is our family's land." That was my land. I hung up. I stared at the phone like it might apologize. It didn't. I didn't sleep that night. I just kept imagining Kevin's face, the blue curtains, and my mother's voice telling me I'd recover, like losing everything was a temporary rash. Like I was a backup account she could borrow from in case of a family emergency. I didn't go back to the motel after hanging up on my mother. I just sat in my rental car in the parking lot, gripping the steering wheel until my fingers started to tingle. Anger has a strange way of clearing your head. The jet lag, the exhaustion, the sense of being lost in my own town, all of it got pushed aside by a single, clean thought. If my house was gone, the money was somewhere, and I knew exactly where it had gone. My Uncle Randall's farm sat about 40 minutes outside town, past a stretch of highway where cell service flickered in and out like it was embarrassed to be there. I hadn't been in years. Last time, he had still been talking about expanding, about buying another dozen horses, because he'd finally cracked the breeding code. I remembered nodding politely and leaving before he could ask for a loan. The gravel driveway was freshly graded when I pulled in. New fencing lined the pasture, clean wood, not the kind of thing you install when you're supposedly broke. Randall was sitting on the porch with a beer, boots kicked up on the railing like he owned the world instead of being 2 missed payments away from losing it. "Well, if it isn't Captain America," he said when he saw me. "Heard you got back from your little vacation." "You got my money," I said, skipping everything that normally passes for family conversation. He squinted at me like I'd just told him the sky was green. "Your money? That was your mom's call, kid." $260,000, I said. "Every cent I had in that house. I want it back." He laughed, actually laughed, and took a long sip of his beer before answering. "You pilots are all the same. You think money's the only thing that matters. That farm has been in this family for 3 generations. You want to be the guy who let it die?" "That farm is yours," I said. "That house was mine." Randall stood up slowly, the porch boards creaking under his weight. Up close, I could smell alcohol on his breath. Not the fun vacation kind, but the sour, permanent version. "Listen to me, Wesley. You start throwing around words like theft and court, you're going to tear this family apart. Your mother won't survive that, and neither will you." I stared at him. "Is that a threat?" He smiled, thin and unpleasant. "Call it advice." I left without another word. Halfway back to town, my car started wobbling. I pulled over, heart hammering, and found a long screw buried in the rear tire. Maybe coincidence, maybe not. Either way, I wasn't laughing. The next morning, I walked into a downtown office with a crooked sign that read Vega Law and asked for the first available appointment. Courtney Vega was younger than I expected, all sharp eyes and efficient movements, like someone who had learned to take up as little space as possible while still controlling the room. She listened without interrupting as I laid everything out. The power of attorney, the sale, the money, Randall's little porch sermon. When I finished, she didn't sugarcoat it. "Bad news first," she said. "The buyer is clean. You're not getting the house back. Good news is you can absolutely sue your mother and your uncle. Using your authority to benefit a third party is abuse. Plain and simple." I told her about the tire, about the beer-soaked advice. She nodded slowly. "We'll need financial records from the farm. Full disclosure. If he's hiding anything, we'll find it." For the first time since I rang my own doorbell and heard a stranger answer, I felt something close to momentum. Courtney didn't waste time. By the end of the day, she had already drafted a request for financial disclosure from Randall and prepared a letter notifying both him and my mother of my intent to sue. She was sharp, fast, and didn't blink when I mentioned that we might be poking a hornet's nest. Her words, "That's what the stick is for." I liked her immediately. Still, something about serving legal papers to my own mother felt like trying to breathe with a pillow pressed to my face. I didn't want this. I didn't want to be here. But I also didn't want to spend the rest of my life being the guy whose family could gut him like a trout and expect him to say thank you. That week was a mess. I was still living out of the motel, trying to string together sleep and sanity. I spent my evenings driving nowhere with the radio on low, hoping the sound of static would drown out the silence in my head. Every time my phone rang, I expected it to be my mother. And one night, it was. She didn't yell. She didn't cry. She used the voice she always reserved for funerals and disasters. Calm, measured, heartbreakingly sincere. "I know you're hurting," she said. "And I don't blame you. I just want you to know I never meant to hurt you." I didn't say anything. I did what I thought was right. Randall was desperate. I've seen that farm my whole life. Your grandfather died on that land. I thought you'd understand." "You didn't give me the chance to," I said quietly. She took a shaky breath. "We're family, Wesley. We don't sue each other. Please don't let this go to court. We can fix this." "Then fix it," I said. "Get me my money back." There was a pause. Then her voice changed, just slightly. Cooler. "I don't have it. It's gone." I hung up before I said something I couldn't take back. The next morning, Courtney found something. Randall hadn't just used the money to pay off debt. He had funneled a chunk of it into a private account and used some of that to upgrade his equipment, new saddles, tack, even a custom trailer. Receipts were filed sloppily, as if he thought no one would ever ask questions. That same afternoon, Courtney received a letter with no return address. It was handwritten, short, and disgusting. "Back off Vega, or you won't be walking so sharp next time." She showed it to me without ceremony. Could be a bluff, could be Randall, could be one of his flunkies. "You want to report it?" She gave a tight smile. "Already did." That night, I sat in my car outside Haley's apartment for over 20 minutes before working up the courage to knock. She opened the door wearing a hoodie and sleep-deprived eyes. She didn't look surprised to see me. "I figured this was coming," she said, stepping aside. We sat on her couch in silence for a while. Finally, she said, "She didn't ask me. Mom didn't tell me what she was planning until it was already done." "But you knew after," I said. She nodded slowly. "She told me after the sale, said it was legal, said you'd understand." I wanted to believe her. I looked at her. "And now?" Haley sighed. "Now I think you're the only one trying to do the right thing." She stood up, walked to a drawer, and pulled out a small black notebook. I wrote down what she said, the day she told me, just in case. I took it, stunned. Inside was a single quote. "He won't find out until it's too late. Randall can keep the farm, and Wesley's not the kind to make a scene." Her handwriting was shaky, like she hadn't been sure she wanted to record it. "She said that?" Haley nodded. word for word. My chest tightened. Betrayal burns. But vindication? That hits colder. I'll testify, she added. If it goes to court, I'm not letting her drag you through this alone. I left her place with the notebook in my pocket and something I hadn't felt in weeks: hope. It was raining the morning we filed the lawsuit. Not a soft drizzle. The kind of rain that turns streets into streams and makes every windshield wiper sound like it's trying too hard. I took it as a good omen. The world felt angry, too. Courtney was already in her office when I arrived, dressed in a storm gray blazer like she'd color coordinated with the weather. She handed me a coffee without a word and slid the final paperwork across the table. My name was printed in bold at the top of the page, under the heading Plaintiff. The defendants, Jenna Carter and Randall Hope. There was a moment, just a flicker, where I hesitated. This wasn't just a formality. This was the line. The no turning back point. I was suing my own mother. My own blood. The woman who'd taken care of me when I broke my arm falling off a bike, who used to bring cupcakes to school on my birthday, who cried at my graduation. And still, I signed 3 claims. Fraud. Abuse of power of attorney. And faux unjust enrichment. Courtney added a request for restitution. $260,000 plus $50,000 in emotional damages and full coverage of legal fees. She explained that if the court found even partial liability, it could force liquidation of Randall's assets, including, yes, the farm. She filed it before noon. By dinner, the news had hit the local grapevine like lightning striking dry brush. A small town doesn't need social media to spread gossip. Just one courthouse clerk with a cousin who works at the diner. By the end of the day, the entire county knew the Carter boy is taking his mama to court. I tried not to look at my phone. That night, my voicemail was full of calls from unknown numbers. Old neighbors, church ladies, even one of my high school teachers. Everyone had an opinion, and most of them weren't on my side. But I didn't care. I had a room paid up through the month. I had Courtney in my corner. And now, thanks to Haley, I had ammunition. Randall, on the other hand, went ballistic. I found out from a friend who worked at the feed store that he'd been ranting to anyone who would listen, calling me ungrateful, a city boy with no respect for legacy, and, my personal favorite, a vulture in a pilot's uniform. Classy. He called a press conference. Well, okay, it was a Facebook Live rant filmed on his porch with a six-pack and a shaky camera, but it made the rounds. I put sweat and blood into this land, he bellowed, and my nephew, my own flesh and blood, sells out for a few bucks and sues his own mama like she's some kind of crook. Disgusting. That's what's wrong with this country. No loyalty, no family values, just lawsuits and selfishness. It would have been comical if he hadn't been so clearly enraged, but we weren't playing for sound bites. Courtney had filed a motion requesting financial discovery on all Randall's business accounts. The court approved it. We were going to get a look at his books, whether he liked it or not. When the subpoena hit him, Randall tried to dance. He sent over edited statements, conveniently missing entire quarters of activity, claimed he'd lost receipts, had a glitch in his software, blamed an old bookkeeper who'd moved to Tennessee. Courtney wasn't having it. "This is obstruction," she said, flipping through his half-assed paperwork. "He's hiding something. We dig." Meanwhile, Haley had officially joined the witness list. It was surreal sitting across from her in Courtney's conference room, watching her give a sworn deposition against our mother. Her hands trembled slightly, but her voice stayed firm. She told me she was going to sell the house, Haley said. I asked if Wesley knew. She said, he won't find out until it's done. Randall will finally catch a break, and Wesley's got no one but himself. He'll understand once he cools off. Courtney nodded. Did she say anything about contacting him first? No, Haley said. She didn't even try. Courtney's eyes flicked to me just for a second. She didn't need to say it. This was our kill shot. Still, I wasn't prepared for what came next. A week later, Courtney received a response from Randall's legal team. It wasn't a counteroffer. It wasn't an apology. It was a threat. They claimed we were harassing a vulnerable elderly woman and a veteran small business owner, attempting to extort funds under false pretenses. They accused me of emotional manipulation, of dragging family into court for personal gain. And they had the audacity to suggest we consider mediation to avoid public humiliation. Courtney practically laughed reading it. Classic bluster, she said. They know they're cornered. This is them trying to rattle you. I didn't rattle. I'd been in planes struck by lightning. Randall's tantrums were noise compared to that. What did shake me, though, was the realization that my mother hadn't once tried to contact me again. No calls, no messages, no apologies, nothing, not even denial. It was as if I'd been written out of her emotional will, her son replaced by a convenient legal target. The day we received confirmation of the court date, I stood outside the courthouse in the rain again. Same stormy sky, same sour wind. Except this time, I wasn't a passenger. I was taking the controls. The courthouse doors opened, and Courtney stepped out beside me. She handed me the finalized docket. We're set, she said. First hearing in 3 weeks. Let's take back what's yours. I looked up at the clouds. Let it storm. The courtroom was older than I expected. High ceilings, dusty wood, flags in the corners that drooped like they'd given up decades ago. It didn't have the cinematic weight of a courtroom you see on TV. No dramatic lighting, no gasps from the audience, just the soft shuffle of papers and the quiet tension of people who knew this wasn't going to be over quickly. We weren't the only ones watching. The room was packed. Neighbors, reporters, people from church who hadn't looked me in the eye since the lawsuit hit the papers. Some sat stiff with judgment, others with curiosity. One woman brought popcorn. I wasn't kidding about the town grapevine. My mother sat at the defendant's table in a navy suit that tried too hard to look modest. She clutched tissues before the judge even entered the room, already leaning into the role of the tragic matriarch. Randall sat next to her like a bulldog in a too-tight jacket, jaw set, shoulders back, daring someone to call him what he was. His lawyer, an overconfident guy named Milton Voss, looked like he'd been plucked straight from a commercial about car crashes and settlements. Courtney looked calm, deadly calm. She didn't bring a pile of papers, just one folder and a pen. When the judge, a graying woman with the patience of a stone, called us to order, everything felt real in a way it hadn't until that moment. No more what-ifs. This was it. Courtney opened with quiet precision. Your Honor, my client entrusted his mother with a power of attorney document meant for medical emergencies. Instead, she used that trust to sell his home without consent, transferring the entire profit to her brother, the co-defendant, under the pretense of a family emergency. This was not an act of compassion. It was theft. Milton Voss jumped in before the judge could breathe. This is a tragic misunderstanding between family members. Mrs. Carter acted in good faith, believing her son would want to help his uncle. This isn't fraud. It's poor communication. Courtney smiled like a wolf. Let's test that theory. She called Haley first. My sister took the stand in a pale blue blouse, her voice steady but low. She confirmed the quote she had written down, repeated what Mom had said word for word. Every syllable landed like a hammer. He won't find out until it's too late. Randall can keep the farm, and Wesley's not the kind to make a scene. Courtney let it hang in the air for a few seconds before nodding. No further questions. Milton stood, looking vaguely disgusted. Miss Carter, are you aware that family dynamics can be complicated? That people say things in stress they don't always mean? Haley didn't flinch. I'm aware my mother didn't want Wesley to know, and that she made sure of it. He sighed, sat down. Nothing to salvage. Then came Mom's turn. She looked fragile as she walked to the witness stand, dabbing her eyes like she had lost someone dear, not someone else's home. When Courtney asked if she had attempted to contact me during the sale, she hesitated. He was traveling. I didn't know where. Courtney raised an eyebrow. Did you attempt an email? A message through his airline? Call his sister? Mom shook her head. No, I didn't think he'd answer. He needed rest. 3 weeks, and not a single attempt to contact him? Mom's voice wavered. I panicked. Randall needed help. I thought I was doing the right thing. Courtney pounced. Did you use the power of attorney to act in Wesley Carter's best interest? I thought, yes or no? Mom looked down. No. The room was so quiet you could hear the fans turning. When Randall took the stand, he didn't try to play the victim. He leaned into his own mythology. Family man, rugged farmer, keeper of the legacy. Look, I didn't ask for a damn penny. Jenna made the call. I told her not to if it would cause trouble, but she insisted. That's her boy. I'm just the one trying to keep 100 years of work from being bulldozed. Courtney didn't flinch. Mr. Hope, do you own a bank account ending in 7391? He blinked. Yeah. Can you explain why, 1 week after receiving the home sale funds, over $32,000 were transferred into that account and then spent on luxury farm equipment, including a custom horse trailer and 2 top-line breeding mares? Randall shifted in his seat. That was investment. You got to spend money to make money. Was that money used to repay your debt? No. Did you return any of it to Wesley Carter? Hell no. Why would I? Did you think he would ever see it again? Randall's eyes narrowed. Not my problem. The judge leaned forward. Mr. Hope, were you aware that the money was obtained without the direct consent of the owner? That's between him and his mother, Randall said smugly. She had the papers. The judge shook her head. No, Mr. Hope. The law doesn't work that way. If she abused the power of attorney, and you knowingly benefited, you're complicit. His lawyer jumped up, objecting, but it was over. The judge recessed for deliberation, though, honestly, no one needed to hear her verdict to know where it was headed. An hour later, we stood for the decision. Jenna Carter was found liable for abuse of power of attorney and fraudulent misrepresentation. Randall Hope was found liable for unjust enrichment and complicit fraud. They were ordered to pay $260,000 in restitution, plus $50,000 in damages, plus all legal costs, jointly and severally. The court gave them 12 months, APO, to pay in full. Failing that, the sheriff's office was authorized to initiate seizure of assets, including any property not protected by homestead exemption. The final blow? The judge referred Jenna's actions for criminal review. She'd likely get a slap on the wrist, maybe probation, maybe worse, but it was no longer just a civil matter. As the court emptied, Mom sat frozen at the table, eyes fixed on the floor. Randall stormed out, shoving past people, barking about traitors and family leeches. But no one followed him. Courtney turned to me. "That's one chapter done." I nodded, but I didn't feel relief. Just clarity. You don't win in court against your own family. You survive it. A year passed. 12 long months of court-ordered deadlines, escrow negotiations, silent holidays, and lawyers making sure Randall didn't accidentally forget another payment. But they paid. Not out of remorse, not out of reconciliation, just because they had no choice. Bit by bit, the funds landed in a holding account Courtney had set up. Each deposit came with no note, no apology. Just cold, silent restitution. Randall tried to delay by selling off cheap livestock first, then parts of his equipment, then finally, inevitably, a big chunk of the farm. The irony practically whistled through the fields he fought so hard to protect. By the end of it, he was still standing, but without the legacy he claimed I destroyed. He destroyed it himself by treating theft like loyalty and pride like immunity. Jinnah? She pled guilty to misdemeanor fraud as part of a deferred judgment agreement. No jail time, but a criminal record, 2 years probation, and a requirement to complete ethics counseling. I didn't even know that existed. She never contacted me again. Not even when the final payment cleared. The money arrived in full a week before the anniversary of my return flight from Thailand. Courtney sent a text. "All cleared. Clean start. Proud of you." Simple. Perfect. I used the settlement to buy a new house, not in Kentucky, not even in the same time zone. I settled in Oregon, near the coast, a small place on a hill with pine trees instead of bluegrass. Quiet. Fresh. Unburdened. No keys under flower pots. No shared paperwork. No power of attorney. The only person I gave a spare key to was Haley. She flew out a month after I moved in, and we sat on my porch drinking coffee while the fog rolled in over the cliffs. She didn't say much. She didn't have to. She chose me when it counted. And she was the only one who ever truly apologized. A few weeks later, while walking through PDX Airport after a short flight gig, I heard someone call out behind me. "Wesley Carter?" I turned. It was Kevin Drake. Kevin, the guy who bought my old house. He looked a little older, more settled, like a man who had finally hung art on the walls. "Hey," he said, stepping forward with an easy smile. "I just wanted to say, I'm sorry for how that all went down. I had no idea at the time." I nodded. "You weren't the problem, Kevin. You were the receipt," he chuckled. "Well, it's a great house. I hope you've landed somewhere good." I did. We shook hands, and he disappeared into the crowd. I walked to my gate alone, feeling something I hadn't in over a year. Light. Sometimes, the people who say they're your family are the ones who expect you to bleed quietly when they cut you. And sometimes, real family is the one who stands up, not the one who shares your last name. That day, I flew home. My home. The one nobody else had the keys to.
This story isn't just about a house being sold. It's about trust weaponized, legality misused, and the brutal cost of silence within families. What do you do when the betrayal comes not from an institution or stranger, but from your own mother? Wesley Carter's story reveals how fragile ownership can be when legal tools like power of attorney are left unchecked, and when emotional obligations are exploited for financial ends. His mistake wasn't negligence. He took precautions before his trip. The true vulnerability was invisible, a dormant document, signed years earlier in good faith. How many of us have similar paperwork lying around, never imagining it could be misused? Would you have remembered to revoke something like that? When Jinnah sold Wesley's house without warning, using the authority he granted her, she justified it as an act of sacrifice. But sacrifice for whom? Her claim that family comes first masked a hierarchy. Randall's legacy mattered more than Wesley's autonomy. Ask yourself, at what point does family loyalty become emotional blackmail? Randall, the entitled recipient of that betrayal, didn't just accept the money. He spent it lavishly, then dared to claim that Wesley was destroying tradition by demanding it back. But what tradition are we defending if it's built on theft and silence? Wesley's strength lies not in anger, but in strategic, quiet resistance. He lawyered up, documented, and never retaliated emotionally, even when threatened. His story invites the question: would you have had the resolve to sue your own mother? Could you endure the public backlash from a town that values appearances over accountability? The lawsuit was never about vengeance. It was about setting boundaries where none existed, about saying no more to being treated like collateral for someone else's crisis. And the legal system agreed. This story teaches us that family can be your greatest vulnerability, or your strongest boundary test. Trust must be earned, not assumed. And when your rights are violated, even by blood, protecting yourself isn't betrayal. It's survival.